Hey, thanks everyone for joining. Anthony Lewis has joined me today to tell us how to use primary directions with the Morinus free software, which is available for the astrologers. So, thanks, Anthony, for joining. It's a pleasure having you again.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, I think we've had long discussions about software. I've had endless discussions with Roke, and I think you showed me Delphic Oracle before I purchased it. But I think Morinus is kind of standard free software which many people use. So, and primary directions is kind of uh, I won't say it's slowly growing in popularity. But it's already very popular, but it's just popular among the traditional astrologers. So, uh, so I just thought we should do one kind of specific video to in terms of how to kind of set up primary directions in Morinus and how to use it. Because when I started doing learning about primary directions, and when I had Martin Ganston's book with me, it was very difficult for me to set up in the software, and I did not know most of the things in terms of how to work with it. So I had to ask Rogue to help me to kind of do things. So I thought we should. It would be good to kind of do a specific video on it and give an outline of how to use it, so that people can do it by themselves.
Okay. So where do you want to start?
Wherever you like to.
Okay. Well, my thought was there may be some viewers who really don't know or understand clearly what primary directions are. So I thought maybe we should start with talking about what they are before we show how to set up your software to calculate them.
Sure, of course. I think that's a
And
very good place to start.
yeah, and as you said, Martin Ganston's book is excellent, so I would recommend it. Yep, you have it there. Yeah. You have to read it slowly and carefully, but it's really quite thorough and very helpful.
Yeah.
And I think he points out that primary directions go back at least 2,000 years to the Hellenistic times, the time of Dorotheus. And they were one of the major, if not the major predictive technique in Western astrology until maybe the 19th century when there was a resurgence of astrology. And then I think what happened was that the modern astrologers were finding the math too difficult.
Of course.
And Alan Leo came up with a way to simplify it. And I think it caught on because he had a simpler to calculate method, but it wasn't the classical method. And what's happened in recent years is that there's been a resurgence of interest, recent years being the past few decades, of the original technique and the original calculations. And in fact, there's been some confusion throughout history about how they were calculated. And in the Renaissance period, Regiomontanus came up with a method that was actually goes back to the Persian Arabic times. That was a misunderstanding of how they were done in Ptolemy's time. And so it wasn't until Placidus that we got a revision back to the correct or original method. I shouldn't say correct. I think it's correct, but some people don't.
Yeah, I think it's perception. Yeah. But many people believe that ancient method is the correct method, and Dorotheus uses primary directions along with solar revolutions and perfection in Carmen Astrologicum. I think it's the book 4. So,
right. Primary directions, I think from the beginning, were conceived of. Well, I think there was a misconception in modern times that primary directions would give you very exact, accurate dates. And that was a modern idea.
But I think you mentioned that it's not necessarily the exact date, but it can be sometime before and after in one of your articles.
Right. There really gives you time periods, much like the Time Lords. And in some ways, it's like a dasha system where you have a planet that's very important for a period of time, and it rules the period, and events of the period relate to that planet. And I think that was the original idea in Dorotheus. And modern authors got, I think, misunderstood and thought you could pinpoint dates for exact events with primary directions. But anyway, we haven't said what they are. So basically, yeah. I thought it'd be good to start with a chart and just show what they look like.
Sure.
And the chart I picked was the River Phoenix. So I've got to share my screen. Let me just do that. How do I share screen?
You'll see a green.
Yeah, I see it's the green thing at the bottom. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it's there.
Okay, so this is River Phoenix, the actor who died young of a drug overdose. I don't know, do you know him or?
Yeah.
Okay. And what's notable is we have a good chart for him. He was born in 1970. And we have some key dates in his life. He began his acting career at age 10. He became notable to the public, or well known to the public, in 1986, so he would have been 16. And then he died in 1923 of a drug overdose, so he would have been 23. So those are key dates in his life. He had a beginning of a career as an actor at age 10, a prominent national prominence or international prominence at age 16 because of his acting, and death at age 23. So we would expect, in his chart for these dates to show up: age 10, age 16, age 23, okay? Let me go to his chart. Can you see my screen? Can you see the chart or no?
Yes, it's there.
Okay. So this is his chart. I'm using Solar Fire just to show the chart. And these are the terms or bounds. Mm-hmm. So he's born, this is the tropical zodiac. Let me just say what I'm using here. Tropical zodiac, I have Placidus houses, but you can see the whole signs as well.
Okay.
And this is his midheaven, and this is his ascendant. So in primary directions, the idea is this, that when you're born, the earth doesn't stop, the earth continues to move. And as we know, everything rises at the ascendant. So the earth continues to move and the sky appears to ascend in this direction clockwise. So for instance, Jupiter at the ascendant will continue to rise and reach the midheaven at some point. Mm-hmm. The sun here, which is near the midheaven, will continue to rise and will reach the midheaven. Mars here will continue to rise, will reach the midheaven, etc. And the axes, the meridian axis, this one, and the horizon axis, this one, are the key anchors in the chart. And so these are what we call significators, meaning that they signify something. The ascendant, for instance, signifies your life, how your life will go, your life force, your energy, your body, your health, etc., your personal decisions. The midheaven signifies your career, your public reputation, your public standing, what you do in the world. So in primary directions, what we would wonder is what will reach, I'm looking at dates 10, 16, and then death at 23. Well, since 10 and 16, he began acting at age 10, and he had national prominence at age 16. Is there anything that might reach the midheaven at those ages? And in primaries, or as the Earth turns, every roughly 4 degrees, there's a new 4 minutes, there's a new degree on the midheaven.
Sure.
It's like a clock. So every 4 minutes, this ticks 1 degree. Mm-hmm. So for instance, Mars here, and this is in the ecliptic now, not on the equator. The midheaven we measure on the equator, the timing. Is at 23 Leo, and the midheaven is what, at 13. So in On the ecliptic, there's about 13 degrees. There's about 10 degrees between the midheaven at 13 and Mars at 23. So we'd have to see what the numbers are on the equator, what's called the right ascension, to get the timing. But we can see that at roughly 10 years of age, Mars will get to the midheaven.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe Mars at the midheaven is the time when he begins his acting career.
Sure.
That makes some sense because Mars rules his ascendant, and the ascendant ruler reaching the midheaven should be something important related to career.
Sure.
Okay. Mars also rules what here? Rules the 6th house, which could be health issues, but it could also be the daily work that you do, like your daily labor. And then if we keep going here, the sun is at 0, so from 23 to 30 is about 7 degrees on the ecliptic, which may be about 6 degrees on the equator. So at age 16 or 17 roughly, we're going to see the sun reaching the midheaven, and that's when he reaches national prominence. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then he dies at age 23. Now, death is more a 7th house. The sunset is often a representation of death. And is there anything that's roughly 23 degrees away from the horizon here? Because the horizon is your body, your physical health. Well, Saturn's at 22 of Taurus, and the ascendant is what, 5? The descendant is 5 to 22 in ecliptic degrees is about 17. But we're talking about the movement of the ascendant, so that could well be 23 degrees. Now, one way to check this is a lot of software programs allow you to, quote, animate the chart. So I'm going to click animate. So here's the same chart, okay? But I'm going to advance it by 4 minutes at a time, because remember, every 4 minutes approximately is 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just do it. Let's see what happens. Here's his original chart. Now in primary, say they keep the ecliptic degrees constant. As I animate it, they're going to shift a little forward.
Sure.
Okay. So here's age 1, 4 degrees, 4 minutes later. Age 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, look what happened at age 10. Watch the Mars.
Yeah.
9 to 10. Mars crossed the midheaven. He began his acting career. Okay? Let me repeat that. Age 9, age 10. So here in primary direction language, Mars is on the midheaven about age 10, crosses the midheaven about age 10, and this is exactly when he began his acting career. Let's go forward. Age 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 16, the sun hasn't quite got there, but 17. So between age 16 and 17, the sun crosses his midheaven, and he has national fame for his a role in a movie that he did. He comes to public attention, age 16. You see how this works?
Sure.
Now, as the midheaven is 1 degree every 4 minutes, but the ascendant, because of the obliquity of the ecliptic, is going to move at different rates, right? There's different ascensional times. We're now at age, 17 here? So let's go to 23 and watch the Saturn, which is a universal ruler of death.
Sure.
We're age 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and he dies. Isn't that amazing?
Saturn falls below.
Saturn crosses the horizon.
Yeah.
And the descendant is the sunset, so he reaches his sunset here as Saturn 22, 23. Okay. So this is basically what primary directions are. You're advancing the chart 1 degree for every year of life on the midheaven, 1 degree on the midheaven for every year of life, and seeing what happens to the planets as they advance clockwise around the wheel.
Sure.
So questions about this? 'Cause I thought it was good to begin with this so people could really see how primaries work.
It's amazing.
And I mean, the nice thing about this is you can eyeball the chart and get a general sense. Let's go back to the original chart. Whoops. Here's the original chart. You can eyeball the chart. For instance, here you can, Jupiter is at 1 degree, his ascendant's at 5 degrees, so roughly age 4, something significant related to Jupiter should have happened in his life. We don't know the exact age unless we calculate the degree on the equator.
Mm.
But we know in the ecliptic distance is usually moderately close to this difference in right ascension on the equator. So we can say, just eyeballing this, no calculation, roughly at age 4, something happens important. It's probably related to Jupiter.
Sure.
In his biography, when he was a little boy, his family joined a cult and they went to Venezuela to become preachers.
Uh-huh.
And at roughly age 4, he was raped by one of these cult members. Not a typical Jupiter. The travel certainly connects with Jupiter. I'm not sure about the rape, how that might fit. Except that Jupiter's in the terms of Mars here.
Mm-hmm.
And then what else? We saw Mars getting here at age 10. We'd expect an important career thing at 10 degrees away, roughly at age 10. And we'd expect some kind of prominence 6 or 7 years later. And to calculate the exact period, you have to convert it to right ascension. And seeing Saturn so close to the descendant, we'd expect, 1 second.
Okay.
My wife will get that. Okay. You'd expect something important to happen to his life, his health, perhaps, that's of the nature of Saturn when Saturn crosses the horizon here, the western horizon at where the sun sets. And when we did the calculation, this happened at age 23. Although in the ecliptic, as I said, it's 5 to 20, it's only 17 degrees of ecliptic longitude, but because of the obliquity of the ecliptic, it turns out to be 23 degrees on the equator.
Mm.
And so just eyeballing the chart, we could say, probably around age 20-ish, he better be careful. There's a strong Saturn influence. Saturn's opposed to the ascendant then. And, well, he didn't live long enough for this Neptune to get up here.
Sure.
So we don't know what that would have been. And I'm just using the angles here. I'm not using the intermediate positions.
Okay.
Okay. Now, what the software does, it will give us precise dates when we can see these things happening.
Mm-hmm.
So let me go to my slides. I made some slides. Can you see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay. Very brief, just to review primary directions, what they are before we get to the Morinus. So I've already said most of this. The daily rotation of the Earth causes planets and points on the ecliptic to appear to rise in the east at the ascendant, to move clockwise, culminate in the south, and set in the west. There are 24 hours in a day. So each time zone, which is 15 degrees, represents 1 hour. And it takes about 4 minutes for each degree to pass over the midheaven. It's like a clock. And the ancients equated each degree on the equator to 1 year of life. So that's the time measure, that's the classical time measure. What is a promissor and what is a significator? When we do primaries, we have fixed points that planets are moving toward. Those are the significators. And commonly the ascendant and midheaven are used because they're the angles. And when the promissor, which is the planet that's moving with the rotation of the Earth, reaches the significator, you will expect something of the nature of the planet that's moving clockwise to occur related to the nature of the significator. So if it reaches the midheaven, something in public view perhaps related to career. If it reaches the ascendant, something related to your health, your body, your life force. The descendant, something that opposes the ascendant, could be death or illness or sometimes travel, and so on. Okay. The classic tradition, the Hellenistic astrologers like Dorotheus and others calculated along the zodiac, along the ecliptic, and did not take into account the latitude of the planet. This is important in that planets generally are not right on the ecliptic. They're usually a little above it or a little below it. That's why we have the band of the zodiac. They can be maybe 8 or 9 degrees above, 8 or 9 degrees below even, or with Pluto even more. So the tradition was just to take the projection onto the ecliptic and measure that. And they would take latitude into account in interpreting what the aspect meant, but not in calculating when it would perfect. And the classic method of Ptolemy was the so-called semi-arc proportions, meaning that each planet has a certain amount of time it takes to get from when it rises to when it culminates at the midheaven. And so planets were considered conjunct by primary direction when they were proportionately at the same position. So, for example, suppose the sun takes 6 hours to get from when it rises to the midheaven. So it takes 2 hours to get to the 12th house cusp. And suppose there's another planet that takes 9 hours. So it takes 3 hours to get to the 12th house cusp. So the proportion will be when the sun is moved 2 hours, the other planet that takes 9 hours to get to culminate will be at the same position as the sun 3 hours after it rose. And those positions are equivalent, and you'd say that planet X reached the position of the sun after it traveled 3 hours. So that's the proportion. That's how Ptolemy did it. The math is a little complex, so that's why people started doing it the other way. Al-Biruni, just his little, very historical, and Regiomontanus came up with a different method, different than Ptolemy's proportional method. They used what they called circles of position. Basically, they drew a circle from the north point of the horizon, where the meridian crosses the horizon in the north, through the planet to the south point of the horizon. And they said when 2 planet circles of position coincide, that's when they're conjunct. The 2 methods often differ in timing by a year, 2 years, 3 years. So they give you very different timings. And then there was I think Alan Leo came up, I'm not sure if it was Alan Leo, him or one of his colleagues came up with the idea of doing primary directions under the pole of the planet, meaning they sort of combined the Regiomontanus idea with the Placidus idea and came up with yet another system, trying to make the math more simple. But anyway, Regiomontanus did use the latitude of the planets. So in his system, his circle of position that locates the planet in space goes through the body of the planet, whereas Ptolemy was using the zodiacal position, and the tradition was the zodiacal position of the planet, not the body of the planet. So there's different ways to do primary directions. Interrupt me if I'm not making any sense.
No, it's amazing.
Okay. And then I'm going over this because all these things come up in, I think, in Morinus, they're options, and I think in Delphic Oracle, they're options.
Yeah, sure.
So it's good to know what they're referring to. And Morinus, Morin de Villefranche, in the 17th century in France, he used both. He used both primary directions without latitude, that is the ecliptic positions, and primary directions involving the body of the planet as well. He thought they both worked. And he recommended or used for aspects of planets that have latitude, what's called this Bianchi D Method. And what Bianchi did, he said, well, if we're using the body of a planet, and the planet is not on the ecliptic, it has a latitude, say, above or below the ecliptic, then its aspects are not going to be measurable on the ecliptic. So what he did was he made two planes. He had the plane of the planet and the plane of the ecliptic, and they kind of intersected at the angle that was the latitude of the planet. And he took conjunctions at the body of the planet, but then the opposition is directly across as far below the ecliptic as the planet is above the ecliptic. That clear or no?
Sure.
And then the squares were the intersections with the ecliptic, like the moon's nodes. So the moon's a good example. The moon has a angle about 5 degrees with the ecliptic. So its nodes are 0. So the squares of the moon would be right on the ecliptic. And if the moon is at its highest latitude, it's about 5 degrees above. And then its opposition would be about 5 degrees below the ecliptic.
Yeah, exactly.
And so Bianchi said, let's do it this way to calculate. And that's an option in most of these programs. And I think, was there anything else? Oh, dignities. These are the dignities I used. They were the dignities Dorotheus used. And this table, or one like it, is available in several sites on the internet. I put a couple here. Project Hindsight has a version of it at this link. And Ryan Butler has a very nice site, and he has a version of it at this link, medievalastrologyguide.com. Dignities. Okay, so that was my slides. So let's go to Morinus. Can you see the Morinus or not? You can see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the traditional Morinus program. And this is the chart of River Phoenix that we saw before. And the way I've set up the program, well, let me just show you. For those who don't know the program, you enter your data in this box. River Phoenix, he's a male. He was born this year, this date, this time, 7 hours west of Greenwich. I put in the latitude and longitude of his birthplace. He was born in Oregon, United States, Madras, Oregon. And here's the chart. You had some trouble, I think, with the time zones.
Yeah.
Yeah. Morinus doesn't automatically calculate time zones. You really have to check. What I do is I find the chart first in astro.com, Astro Data Bank.
Okay.
I use that data, I enter it, and I make sure the chart that I get looks like the one on the astro.com site.
Okay, good. I think that's a good way to check, but yeah.
Yeah. And often they don't match because I made some mistake, or I put plus versus minus in terms of the time zone, or there's daylight savings that I didn't know about. But the astro.com charts are pretty well verified. So if your chart doesn't match, I look at the ascendant, the midheaven, and the moon to make sure they match.
Okay.
And if those three things match, I know I've got this correct chart.
Mm-hmm.
And Morinus lets you put outside the wheel Dwads or Antisha, or I think lots.
Mm.
I put the Antisha.
Okay.
You can use any. I did that partly for a reason because Morinus says you can use the Antisha in primary directions, not just the planets. So, and I'll show an example of that. And then if you go to options, you have to pick a house system. I picked Placidus because I like Placidus for natal charts. I think the Placidus cusps are significant. And a value of Placidus, since we're using Placidus semi-arc, is that every 2 planetary hours is a new house cusp. So I know that the planets in here have risen in the first 2 planetary hours after birth. And the planets in here have risen in the 3rd or 4th planetary hours after birth. and the planet's here in the 5th or 6th planetary hours after birth, and then there's the culmination. And because from the midheaven to the ascendant is approximately 90 degrees, or on the equator, it's exactly 90 degrees in right ascension. And each degree is a year of life. This is the first 90 years of life represented. Nowadays, people are living longer, but once you get into the ninth house, you're beyond the human lifespan. Okay.
Yeah.
And options. So for primary directions, let me do the simpler thing first. They're what are known as primary keys. Keys are the equivalence between 1 degree on the equator, or 1 degree of right ascension off in the midheaven, and how you want to calculate the time. Ptolemy does a 1-for-1. Each year, this corresponds to 1 degree. So 4 degrees over the midheaven means your 4 years of your life have passed. This is the static. I recommend the static rather than the dynamic, although there's some astrologers who swear by the dynamic, meaning that they look at exact measurements on the day you were born and use those to calculate when things were happening. Nibod is the classic, since I forget which century he was born. I think he's Renaissance. He became the standard method of measuring time, say from the Renaissance onward. And what he did, he said, well, there's 360 degrees in a circle, and that's made equivalent to a year, but the year really has 365.24 days. So it really isn't 1 degree over the midheaven is 1 year. It's really 360 degrees in a circle divided by 365.24 days, which gives us 59 minutes, 8.33 seconds should correspond to a year of life. And that tends to give, because it's a slightly smaller number and you're dividing by it, it pushes things more forward in the future. So as you get older, there's a discrepancy between the Ptolemy measure, 1 degree per year, and the Nibod measure, 59 degrees, 8.33 seconds, 59 minutes, 8.33 seconds per year. And they become further and further apart. By the time you're my age, they're probably several months apart. And so what I do is I usually calculate both. And usually the events happen in between those 2 dates. It gives you a nice range. The other thing I've done, I think this is unique to me, is they let you do a user rate. So for my user rate, I put the midpoint of Nibod and Ptolemy, which is 59 minutes, 34 seconds. And so that gives me a date that's right in the middle of what Ptolemy would say and what Nibod would say.
Okay.
But I think for beginners, it's best to start with the Ptolemy. That's the classic 1 degree per year, and then check it out, see how things play out, and then you can adjust it. Morinus in the 17th century swore by Nibod. He said he thought he attested them all. He thought Nibod was the best. And I tend to agree with him, but sometimes Ptolemy is a little more accurate. Okay, so that's the simpler one, picking a key of time measure. The more complicated one is options, primary directions. We have all these choices. So let's go through them. Placidus semi-arc is the classic method used by Ptolemy. That's what I would recommend. It has, from Hellenistic times through the Renaissance, it was the main system, probably the only system used. Placidus under the pole is sort of a modern adjustment, trying to make the calculation easier, but it's not necessarily more accurate. It's just easier to calculate. It's close to the semi-arc, but often it's off by a few months. So I'd stick to the Placidus semi-arc. Regiomontanus was a system where he misunderstood Ptolemy and made these circles of position. and then had the circles line up of two planets to be a conjunction. And that's often off by a year, 2 years or more from the semi-arc. Campanus, I'm not sure what Campanus' primary directions are, so I'm not going to. Okay, then there's a choice, mundane or zodiacal. Mundane means you're simply measuring things on the equator, the projections on the equator. That's not a classical method. The classical method was the zodiacal, preferring to use the ecliptic to measure things. So I would recommend using zodiacal. And then you have a choice. The classic method was not to use latitude at all. So here we have zodiacal without meaning don't take into account the latitude of the planets above or below the ecliptic. Just take their ecliptic positions for your measurements. I generally look at both because I find that they're both significant. Like Morinus said, they both are significant. So if I don't use the latitudes of the planets, I'm just looking at the ecliptic, I check neither. And then the other option I check is both, and I do use the Bianchi method. And that these are the promissor or the significator. To me, it makes no sense to, if you're going to use the latitude of one planet and not the other, why it's like apples and oranges. So I don't do those because they don't make any logical sense to me, but they might be fun to work with. And you have the choice of using the Bianchi method or not. Okay. But let's stick to neither here. So far we're using the Placidus classical method, zodiacal, and without latitude. And then the options. You can use the aspects of the promissors as well. This means that each planet has several aspects. And so do you want to see what say you're looking at somebody's career and say you're looking at Venus, or let's take, Venus, just me. Well, obviously when Venus reaches the midheaven, that's important. But what about when the square of Venus reaches the midheaven or the trine of Venus reaches the midheaven? Those should be important too, as the Earth turns. So here we're saying let the aspects of the promissors be counted when they reach the significators. And then these other options, the promissors to the aspects, to me that's sort of an experimental. You can try it, but why compound your life? And should the ascendant and midheaven also be promissors? I think that's a good idea, although I don't think it's a classical method. I think classically you let the ascendant and midheaven be fixed and you move things to them. Other planets move to them. But this is saying, let me also let the original ascendant rise, and let the original midheaven progress toward the descendant and see when they make aspects to the planets okay. So I'm going to leave them in. Then what planets do you want to allow to move around the chart? Well, obviously you're going to pick, I think, all the 7 classical planets. I'm not sure what this one, the secondary motion of the moon.
No, I don't think even I have.
Yeah. I'm going to leave it checked, but I'm not sure what that's referring to in the literature. The nodes, I think, are important. I just checked ascending because if the ascending node is doing something, you know what the descending node is doing. So why clutter your page? I think one node is enough because they're exactly opposite each other. The lot of fortune, I pick, and the terms. Now the terms are the bounds. And those are the sort of classical Dorothean technique where you see as the Earth turns, which bounds of the sign get up to the horizon. Okay, let me show you in River Phoenix's chart. So he's born in the Mars bound of Scorpio. Right? There it is. And there's maybe 2 degrees here until Venus reaches the ascendant, the Venus bound of Scorpio. And then it's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can tell if it's 4 or 5 degrees wide. So this Venus reaching the ascendant corresponds to the time he went to Venezuela with his family that was missionaries, and he got raped by a cult member. And sort of makes sense. Venus in Scorpio, there's a Venus-Mars implication. Venus here rules his 12th house and is really on the cusp, Placidus cusp of the 12th. So you'd expect some sort of a 12th house occurrence when Venus becomes prominent in his chart. And I think being raped by a religious cult member fits. Okay. So the terms, and that will give you the, well, we'll see when we actually do it. For the aspects here, I picked the classical aspects. I didn't put parallel. Some people use them. And for the significators, it's really best to pick one at a time.
Yeah.
If you can pick a lot of them, but then you'll get this enormous list. It'll be hard, confusing. But well, let's look at his career first. I'm going to pick the MC. So I want to study his career. I'm going to look at the MC. Okay.
And this is probably the only place where we would be changing now and then, while the others are constant. So we don't have to touch it unless and until we have to make a very, important changes in the settings.
Right. So I'm going to look at the MC because I know in his career at age 10, he started acting. At age 16, he became a famous movie star. And he's born in 1970. So we go to tables. Whoops. I have to say yes. Okay, so those are my options. Tables, and the very last thing in tables is his primary directions. You can also get there by Control F12. And he died at age 23, so I'm going to look at ages 0 to 25. And I'm going to do direct, which means I'm looking as the Earth is actually turning and planets are rising to the midheaven. And so we get this kind of table. And so since it's not a huge list, because I'm only looking at the midheaven purposely. So we see that here he is at age, this is the arc, 1972. And what month was he born? I don't remember. August. So he's like 2.5. There's a sextile of Venus coming to the midheaven. And this is, I think, when his family decides to go to Venezuela. So could be a nice trip. And then here he is. Age 5. I'm looking at age 10 would be 1980. Okay. Here he is, age 10. He starts acting. Mars comes to the midheaven in January. And then the next thing that happens is the Leo bound of Mars comes to the midheaven in September. Let's go back to his chart. Shrink this down. So here we're looking at, here's Leo. Here's the Leo bound of Mars. This segment reaches the midheaven when he's 10 years old. So not only did Mars go over the midheaven, but now Mars is doubly emphasized because it's bound went over the midheaven. So he's in this Mars in Leo period, and he begins acting. Leo is often connected with actors, right? Drama and actors.
Sure.
And Mars in Leo. Okay. And then, that's age 10. Here he is 16. What's happening? 86, he's 16. The Mercury bound of Virgo comes to the midheaven. So all of a sudden he switches signs. Oh, sign changes are really important whenever there's change of sign, there's usually some major event in the life. So here, this cusp between Leo and Virgo becomes very prominent. He switches from Leo to Virgo. And in doing that, the sun becomes prominent because the sun is in 0 degrees of Virgo. So if you can picture sun on the midheaven, this is prominence, right? I mean,
Yeah, sure.
you can't get more. And so somewhere the sun should come to the midheaven here, and it does. Let's see.
Yeah, it's the 86.
Yeah, there it is.
80. Sorry.
I lost my,
You're in
let
86.
me, yeah, okay. Here we are, okay. Sun came to the midheaven, and he gets nationally famous, and it continues. He becomes quite well known. Then we have the sextile of Jupiter coming to the midheaven in 87, so he's 17. And by now, he's a well-established, famous young actor. Okay. Sextile of Jupiter. Very. I remember we said that we're allowing the aspects of the planets to be promisors. So here's Jupiter at 1 of Leo. Its sextile would be 60 degrees from there. Whoops. Where's the sextile here? I clicked on Jupiter, and there's all its, let me get rid of those. Would be, oh, I'm sorry. This is 1 of Scorpio, so it'd be 1 of Virgo. Okay, so the sextile of Virgo of Jupiter is just after the sun, 1 of Virgo. So not only does the sun come to the midheaven when he's 16, but within a year, the sextile of Jupiter, and Jupiter is quite powerful because it's conjunct the ascendant, comes to the midheaven. So he gets national fame here. And let's see. Now, he dies at age 23. We wouldn't necessarily expect death to show up in a midheaven degree, but it might. At age 23, he has the Venus in Virgo bound coming to the midheaven. So let me see what that is. It's this bound here, Venus in Virgo. Is that significant?
Yeah.
Well, the Venus becomes a time lord at that period of his career because it's the Venus bound. I mean, Venus does rule his 12th, so there is that issue.
Yeah, that's end of something.
The end of something. But if we want to see his physical health, we're going to look at the ascendant. So let's go back to primary directions. The ascendant. The ascendant's going to show us his health, his vitality, his body, his illnesses, his life course. Okay, so I switch now from the significator being the midheaven to the significator being the ascendant, the horizon axis. And let's look at the primary directions to that. And we want to look at, in particular, 93. And so here we see Saturn. We're using the Ptolemy measure, 1 degree is 1 year. Crosses the horizon, opposes the ascendant. In August of 93. I think he died in October. So this goes to the point that these represent periods of time, not exact dates. So the opposition of Saturn, Saturn comes down here, crosses this horizon.
Yeah, it falls below.
In August. Just prior to that, the thing prior to that was the Jupiter bound of Scorpio came up to the ascendant. So let's see where that is. I didn't want to do that. I'm trying to move this out of the way. Here's Scorpio, here's the Jupiter bound. This came on the ascendant. So Jupiter becomes a prominent planet in this time period. And what does Jupiter represent in his chart? Well, interesting. From a Vedic point of view, it rules his seventh, his
Yeah.
second house. So it could be
And
injurious to his health.
uh, yeah.
Um, uh,
Mm,
it is in the Placidus 12th, but it's in the Vedic first, right? And
yeah. Uh,
but I think the most significant thing is that he
but
has the Saturn crossing the horizon in 93.
but I think Jupiter is more of a benefic planet for his
Mm-hmm.
chart because of Scorpio.
Yeah,
Because Jupiter rules the fifth house.
right,
So
right. And it was there since 89, and he certainly had a prominent movie career during this period. But then Saturn comes along and messes things up.
yeah.
Just for out of interest, this is the Placidus measure. Let's look at the Nibod measure. Let's see, what was the date of his death? They should say here.
It's October 31, 1993.
So it's October 31. Okay. I'm going to change the key and see what happens. Primary keys. Here's Ptolemy. Nibod is then.
Actually, I use Nibod.
Yeah. And let's do the same list, but with the Nibod measure and see where that Saturn crosses. So here it crosses in December. It's a little too late, but we have a period now between August and December, right? Is a likely period for this to manifest.
Sure.
Let me use my key, which I use the midpoint. I'm curious to see where it comes out. Primary key, user. So I'm using the midpoint of Placidus and Nibod, which just going to give me the middle of that range. And
It's almost
October 19th. What day did he die?
It's 31st, but here
31st.
It's almost close.
It's very close, yeah. So this is the key that I tend to use because this is what happens with it. It's sort of in the mid-range of Placidus and Nibod.
Okay. So do you think we can just direct the lot of fortune?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good one. Options. I'm going to switch back to the Placidus key just for consistency. And let's direct the lot of fortune. What am I doing here? Options, primary directions. So the lot of fortune. And so this should show his material fortune plus his health. Let's see what happens.
Precisely health. That's why I wanted to just check.
Yeah. And so let me make this bigger. All right. So age 10, he would be 1980. Well, he had the mid-heaven come to a lot of fortune when he was 9. Yeah. Well, no, this is almost age 10, isn't it? Because
yeah.
This is 19. This would be in effect 1980, right? And then at 1986 is when he became really famous.
And that was
nothing really shows up, and then he dies in 93. Yeah, I'm not seeing. He's in the Mars bound of Leo, and a lot of fortune. I mean,
but that's a very long period of 6 years or something.
Yeah, so nothing dramatic. I'm curious. Let's go back to the primary directions. I'm going to go back to the ascendant, and I'm going to look at age 4, and then I want to show you with the Antitia. Let's see. I'm looking. He was raped at age 4, so this period, and nothing dramatic going on here. He's in a Venus in Scorpio bound, which symbolically could represent a rape. But if we go back and to the list of promisors, we put in the Antitia, which Morinus recommended. He said, not only the planets, but their anti-scions are significant. So let's direct the anti-scions as well. And let's go back and look at that period. So I've added the anti-scions to the list. And now because there's so many anti-scions, but I want to look at age 4. So now look what's happened. He's in Venezuela and he has, wow. So let's start here. The anti-sign of Saturn came to his part of fortune.
Sure.
The contra anti-sign of Saturn also is affected by, you would expect that. The square of the anti-sign of Saturn is on the ascendant. Okay, came to the ascendant. So he's got these major Saturn aspects going on at age 4, affecting his part of fortune and the ascendant. Which I think is impressive.
Sure.
I mean, that's why I was limiting what we put in, because look at the size of this list of them.
Yeah.
So let's go back here. Options. I'm going to get rid of the anti-scions just to make it simpler. There they are. Oh, I sometimes use midpoints because often they are telling. I haven't looked at his midpoints. Let's put the midpoints in and look at the time of his death, see if there's some midpoint that's important. I'm curious. So 93. Wait, well, here's a midpoint. I don't see any other midpoint. Oh, here's a Mars Sun. That's in 92. No. Yeah, that's almost a year later. So that might be out of range. No, the only major significant thing in the time of his death is this opposition from Saturn to the ascendant. Okay. But sometimes midpoints are really, they really light up things. So get rid of the midpoints. Okay. So, what do you think?
Midpoints.
So have we gone through how to set this up and how to use it?
Yeah, I think that was perfect. I think you also spoke a lot about how to use primary directions, not just with Morinus, but in general, in terms of predicting with primary directions. So.
Yeah, and I think if you have software that will let you advance the chart 1 degree every 4 minutes.
That's a bit more, it's easier, and also we can watch it with the eye. So that is one advantage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay.
Okay, so I think that pretty much solves the purpose of this video. Thank you so much, and we'll see you once again.
Okay, great.